Yeah, I learned a lot writing that article, and I think of all the chapters in the book, that's the one when it first appeared as a standalone article, it got the biggest response. Interestingly, there was quite a lot of interest from the right-wing press as well, and I think the reason for that is because it didn't really put the EU in a particularly good light. But I think also one of the reasons it worked well, that article, was that I was dealing with something that had kind of already happened. So I was able to talk about the beginning, the precursors, the middle, and the end. It was sort of, the chapter was closed. So I could see it from every angle. And yeah, I guess again the wonders of those people at the London Review of Books, they were prepared not just to have me spend a week in these parts talking to people, but to go and spend a week in Poland talking to the other end of the story. What was the question again?
No, it was just what it was. I mean, well, it was a precursor to others, but it was really that some of them felt it was going to close anyway because investment in the plant had been run down. Some of them.
Yes. I mean, it was one of these cases where every time you think you're getting close to thinking, oh yes, this is what's really going on, you uncover a new layer, I had to say, to be honest, in when it came to write the article, that there was a time when it employed thousands and thousands of people, and the point at which it closed, there were, I think, 500 workers there left. Whereas when most of them had started working there, there were many thousands. I think the most it ever employed was 10,000, so it'd gone all the way down to 500 over a period of maybe 40 years. And the signs, even when people joined in the 1970s, they began to hear the rumours that this place is about to close. So all the time they'd been living there, working there, really, there was this sort of cloud hanging over the place. And when you work in an organisation, you become quite sensitive to the sort of the messages that the infrastructure is telling you. If they don't fix the roof for years and years and years, then it's a sign that perhaps they've got plans that they're not telling you about. When you start with this very stark injustice, that partly thanks to subsidies that the EU allowed Poland to offer, not entirely, but partly due to that, the company Cadbury's, and then the company that took Cadbury's over, they moved production of all these chocolates from this long-established factory to Poland, and saved a lot of money in their wage bill as a result, because workers in Poland are paid much less. So there's that kind of quite stark and clear injustice. But then you have to go on and say, well, the factory was in decline, and also there was a vote. There could have been industrial action, but in the end, a majority of workers voted to accept the quite generous redundancy terms that the company offered. So, you could kind of cut into the story at a certain point and say, oh, that's all right, just the way things happen. Everyone's happy. But then beyond that, there's a deeper story still, which is, well, where do we go from here? The end result of this, insofar as there can ever be an end result, is that a bunch of people in Poland have got some not very secure, mainly casual jobs, paid much less than their counterparts in England. The English people have lost these very secure, very well-paid jobs. Some of them have got other good jobs, some of them haven't. But if you sort of average it out between the Poles and the English workers, the average conditions now are worse. So in other words, the Poles are getting richer, the English are getting poorer, And as the trajectory stands at the moment, the polls are never going to get to those golden days that our ancestors enjoyed, and they're not going to return. Certainly not in the same way for the workers in England. So, and the reason for that is partly because of the way that in the world it's set up at the moment, capital basically flows downhill to wherever labour is cheapest, and so there's a constant downward pressure on wages, and automation is taking jobs. As I said in the article, 20 years ago it didn't seem possible you'd have a robot that could wrap an Easter egg in foil, but now you can. And then beyond that, you get to that point and you think, oh yes, the small number of ruthlessly exploitative capitalists are driving the masses to new forms of enslavement. But then you think, well, wait a minute, that's not going to work either, because if you have a tiny number of capitalists and this vast number of people who are on tremendously low wage employment, basically waiting for robots to take their jobs, then where is the prosperity going to come from? You start to see the breakdown of the entire system. So yeah, I mean, it was reaching out into all sorts of directions. But it also, one of the things that I found interesting about that story was that, as well as reaching forward, it reached back. Because my last book, the last time I came to Bristol to talk about a book, was my previous non-fiction book about privatisation, and I was all het up about privatisation. But what I realised when I looked into the story of the Somerdale factory was that there was an earlier stage in Britain and in many other countries as well, a necessary stage, but one that had consequences. You had this period in British history where there were a number of industrialists, shall we say, capitalists, investors, who were also genuinely concerned about in a very kind of patriarchal, perhaps patronising way, but generally concerned, often for religious reasons, about the welfare of the workforces. The state at that time wasn't really doing much for them in terms of education, healthcare, and in some cases, and the chocolate manufacturers were a notable example of this. The industrialists stepped in. They provided housing, they provided healthcare, they offered pensions, good working conditions. They were concerned about the lives of their workers, and it was paternalistic, but it was also quite personal. Then the state came along, and so effectively you had this nationalisation of services that had previously been provided in a very kind of paternalistic and very patchy and not very efficient way by these industrialists. And the consequence of that was that the industrialists just stepped back from any kind of engagement with their communities. It took a long time, because traditions die hard, but you've now got to the point where the standard multinational corporate attitude is, it's not our job, we're not involved, we want to be in the country without actually touching it. We simply want to put our shed down there, put the machines in, get the workers, churn out the products, distribute them, not have a particular national identity, just be everywhere without actually being anywhere.